you ever sit down in one of those increasingly rare, quiet, reflective moments and think back to simpler times? When people allowed you the luxury of thinking about your answers, of agreeing to disagree, of putting a pin in something to come back and talk about it later? Tell me if any of this sounds familiar. You've cut back on social media because it stopped being fun. You just want to keep up with family and friends, but all you see now are groups, adverts, and hyped up strangers with an agenda. You used to watch the news on TV every day, but now you change channels when it comes on, and you only open your news app when you think you have to. Some of your friends have become really hard work after they picked up some new ideas from somewhere that they really want you to buy into as well. You feel like the world is getting out of control, and nobody's doing much to fix it, just arguing over who started it or pretending it's not happening. You've tried fighting the madness, you've tried playing along, and neither got you anywhere. So, what to do? Where to turn? Well, I'm Quinn, and if any of those things ring true for you, then we have something to talk about. It's enough to drive you round the bend. Conversations that used to be a pleasure now feel like a Special Forces assault course, and it's starting to make life way more complicated than it needs to be. The world now seems to be crammed with angry people fighting with tooth and claw for our attention and our allegiance in an escalating war for control of the new Holy Grail.
The narrative.
But it's not only the nature of the sometimes ridiculous points they're trying to prove that are getting under my skin. It's the constant barrage of pleas and pressure to pick a side in every argument going. You've had enough of it, and so have I. But why are we immune to this effect that we see all around us? Why are you and I still seeing both sides in any given story, whilst all around us folks are being pulled one way or the other? Conversation as an art and a pastime has changed, without doubt, but this video isn't about what caused it. There's plenty of that on YouTube already, so if you were hoping for a political discussion or a critique of some newfangled ideology, then I'd look elsewhere. Personally, I'd be happy if I never, ever heard the word ideology again. In fact, if you're thinking of leaving me a comment telling me that this is a political video after all, slinging some mud in whatever direction you think my sympathies lie, then cut your losses now. Go on, get lost. This video isn't for you because you, my friend, are part of the problem. If you're still watching, then presumably you must be as fed up as I am of absolutely everything in life being forced into a one or the other, win or lose debate right now. It seems we can't address even the simplest question without the answer being loaded with unwritten significance and potential controversy. You and I are used to choosing what we fight for, what we believe in, and who we keep as friends, not an ever-expanding system of factions and party lines, of silos and ever-growing lists of ideologies to divide us. This new trend of telling folks their beliefs are false because one of their opinions doesn't fit some arbitrary purity test isn't one we want a part of. We're already fighting on multiple fronts, and all these new battles that keep popping up risk draining our energies faster than we can replenish them. It's not just frustrating, it's exhausting, and no one rational would blame you for wondering what's happened. Are folks really abandoning their critical thought as it seems? I need a deliberately trivial question to illustrate something here, so let's ask one that really shouldn't ruffle any feathers. Say we asked a bunch of folks, do you prefer strawberries or raspberries? Back in school, when they were teaching us the basics of statistics and percentages, our teachers would have asked us to draw a Venn diagram, something like this. Strawberry lovers on one side, raspberry people on the other, and in between, those like me, who don't have a preference. The diagram doesn't tell us whether anyone in the middle group actually likes strawberries or raspberries, only that when asked to choose, we didn't feel strongly enough to pick one over the other. But say I were to ask someone in one of the decisive fruity camps to describe the situation to me and then draw the Venn diagram based on how they see things. We might end up with a different picture. The overlap you and I think that we're in isn't there anymore. Why would there be? Because this choice between nature's summary delights isn't a simple one of taste. It's a big decision now, loaded with previously unseen significance, implications and knock-on effects, so there's no fence-sitting allowed. Either we declare that we prefer strawberries and renounce raspberries forever, like this side have, or we become othered as outsiders, one of them. As soft fruit heretics, we're no longer welcome to have a foot in both camps. We must choose one or the other. Both or neither aren't a viable option. As inquiring people, we naturally ask why should we follow their lead and make the choice they ask of us? Why should we sacrifice our joy in raspberries and commit to the strawberry way? What's the incentive? So, they tell us all about the scary and powerful big raspberry lobby. The plucky strawberries are outnumbered and need our support to help save their way of life. Once they explain how threatened the strawberries are under the sour menace of the raspberries, we'll be sure to join their good guy cause. It's a fight for survival against a predatory enemy who'll stop at nothing to wipe out this rebellious strawberry alliance. They sure could do with someone like you or me on their side. Together, we can save the strawberry. Strength in numbers, eh? We need big, strong strawberry leaders who'll show those raspberry upstarts up for the naive, weak crybabies they are. If you want a real soft fruit champion, then it's got to be the mighty strawberry all the way. Don't you want to be a winner? Of course. When we ask the same questions of the raspberries, they'll give us mirror images of the strawberries' answers with the roles reversed. They're the heroes, and the strawberries are the big, bad, scary, overwhelmingly weak-minded, soft-handed, know-nothing crybabies of doom. So, where does this leave us with our need for verifiable, relatable data? We can't win on our terms if neither side makes a compelling case, putting you and I in a classic catch-22 situation. If we choose to side with one or the other, we'll likely be welcomed, but at the cost of any ties we may have with people in the other camp. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Whilst we used to be invited to both tables when fruity joy was on offer with no sense of obligation or consequence, no reciprocal conditions to live up to, we're now welcome in neither, unless we choose one team over the other. No middle ground, no don't knows. We've entered the age of the with us or against us mindset. Our original Venn diagram shows the spread of responses when everybody gives straightforward, honest answers without any outside influence. But that's not the case anymore. Now that every opinion matters and brands us as good or bad people depending on who's asking, any act of honesty risks controversy, and no controversy goes unpunished. That's why we now have such large and expanding grey areas. They are the zones of the influenced, where opinions and loyalties shift according to the prevailing social winds. The true believers and thought leaders are all still leading the charge from the outskirts, and you and I are still hunkered down in no man's land, not taking sides as usual. But everyone in those grey zones has made a choice. They've seen the way the wind appears to be blowing and picked a winner for good or bad. They may have been no different to you and I yesterday, but not today. You wouldn't have thought they were the sort to take sides on topics they don't have a stake in, or waste their time on rumours and nonsense, but they're doing it now, and they'd love for us to join them. It's not as if you and I don't have preferences or biases. We have plenty of them. And when they're important enough for us to get passionate about, we'll take a stand and fight our corners. But we don't see why everything has to be a polarising, one side or the other, zero-sum debate with lasting consequences. There's enough things to fight about already without inventing new ways of falling out with each other. We actually value the fact that there are choices to be made and that we get to decide for ourselves, and that's something worth getting passionate about.
For God's sake, what's wrong with you, Quinn? Just play the bloody game. It's not that difficult. It's a dog-eat-badger world out there, pal, so if you aren't a shark, you're a sheep, and who'd want to be a cold sausage on a white Friday, eh? You have to go out there and seize the gravy before the iron gets cold so you don't lose out. Grab the bull by the balls and squeeze them till the canary sings like a fat lady, 'cause all is fair in love and war and the ends justify being mean. Work is a four-letter word, and I'd rather be an angler than a sprat. But in Rome, the rich man threads needles with cowls. So what are you going to stake your bets on, eh? Lumps or humps?
Thanks for the advice, I suppose.
You're welcome.
Oh, you've thought about it though, haven't you? You know, giving in and playing along with it, and I guess you couldn't do it. People are asking you to throw your lot in with ideas or opinions that don't feel right, and they don't respect your reasons for staying out of it. Every time you resist committing, you see the frustration in their eyes, the disappointment that you may already be lost to the other side. But you don't want to alienate half your friends or play pretend to keep the other half on side. What have you to gain from boycotting things you actually like or need to prove points you don't believe in? Trouble is, not believing in either side feels like the most risky position to take. I bet you've watched it happen to someone else in real time like I have. One week, someone's a well-informed, pragmatic soul who cared about things like proof and plausibility. The next, they're part of a silent majority with strong and closely aligned views about something they didn't seem to care much about the week before. So, what's different between the folks in the grey zones and us still standing our ground in the middle? What changed in them to suspend their critical thinking and send them veering off on a tangent, whilst you're still not convinced that anyone has all the answers? We're not passing judgment on anyone here. We don't know without asking why someone ended up in one of those grey areas. Of course, there are certainly selfish and spiteful motivations why someone might pick one side over another, but going grey to pursue opportunities for advancement or for profit are only one reason among many. It could be a pragmatic, informed choice after all. They've weighed up the pros and cons, tested which way the wind appears to be blowing, and made their choice for better or worse. If they see a polarising outcome as inevitable, then picking one or the other side early on might pay dividends later, or at least give them some allies if things get nasty. That's if they really had a choice at all. Bullying and intimidation come in many forms, and only a few of them are visible to everyone. We all have our own vulnerabilities and weaknesses which can be exploited or exposed by people with a point to prove. Even the most innocent and level-headed of folks can be worn down into submission with the right tactics. It doesn't mean they're weak, because you and I feel the pressure that they're feeling too. They've just reached their limits already and made a survival decision. So, why are you and I immune to it so far? Why aren't we in the grey zones yet? Well, I might be able to help you there. Because whilst you might have started noticing this change in the wind in the last few years or months, I've been dealing with an almost identical situation all my life, and I'm no spring chicken. I've had plenty of time to work on the problem. The thing that's stopping you from playing along, that prevents you from just going with the flow and choosing a side, is your sense of veracity. We all have a sense of rightness, for want of a better word, that only gets pricked when something appears wrong with the world. When something seems to be false or contradictory, your sense of veracity gets disturbed and you feel uneasy, nervous, angry maybe. How we all react is different. But what we're reacting to is wrongness, falsehood, or contradiction. When you get that nagging feeling that something just doesn't make sense, but you can't quite put your finger on it yet, that's your veracity calling. This isn't to say you or I are right about everything we believe, or that we hold the same beliefs or principles, but we know that already. We've already changed our points of view before because new information or evidence proved a different viewpoint to be a better explanation than what we previously thought. And that's all we're asking for now. We're waiting to be convinced, but nobody's giving us anything substantial to work with. When veracity tingles, it can only be satisfied with tangible, plausible evidence, not with emotional arguments or social pressure. Your internal sense of veracity is at the heart of your critical thinking, your creativity, and your ability to reason problems out. It underpins your awareness of how things work and your curiosity to find out more. It's in your knowledge of what's right and wrong, fair or biased, plausible or ridiculous. Call it a bullshit detector if you like. Every time something contradicts itself, contradicts the truth as we know it, or our fundamental understanding of how the world works, our veracity sensor starts beeping and flashing, and we have no choice but to pay attention. Your sense of veracity is very strong and vigilant, and that's why you can't play along with half-baked ideas, but not everyone is as aware or as sensitive as you are. You know how a criminal court requires a higher burden of proof than a civil court? If you've not seen that played out in some courtroom drama, you might have heard mention of it in the news at some point. It basically means that in most legal systems you need to prove your point with much more certainty when there's someone's freedom or their life at stake than when you're just suing them for money. Evidence that might make someone liable to pay damages in a civil court may not be enough to convict someone of the same actions in a criminal court because it's held to a different standard of veracity. In civil court, most likely is enough to get a win, but in criminal courts we have to prove beyond reasonable doubt, and that takes a lot more work. Well, I'd say your sense of veracity is calibrated closer to the beyond reasonable doubt standard of criminal case certainty than some of those folks who've slipped into the grey zones. They don't necessarily believe everything they're told, but the standard of proof they seek, the tuning of their senses of veracity, is closer to the most likely of the civil courts. If you score a 9 or 10 on the personal veracity scale, they're currently in the 4, 5 or 6 zone. Those folks in the grey areas who used to sit in the centre zone with you haven't lost their faculties for critical thinking, but they've lowered their threshold of veracity in order to join a side. Whether by choice, intimidation or resignation, they've chosen to let things get by with a much lower burden of proof, at least around certain subjects. It's a concept as old as the hills. Back in ancient Greece, philosophers talked of the eternal battle between logos, the principle of understanding the world through fact-based reasoning, and mythos, the human default of telling stories and seeing characters in forces of nature. Many of them saw the path of humanity as an inevitable march from the naivety of mythos towards the enlightenment of logos, though the many ups and downs of the next couple of millennia proved they had some work left to do on those theories. What we observe around us now certainly seems to indicate a society veering away from a respect for experiment, verification and rationality towards superstition, rumour and assumption. Whichever way you think of it, a bullshit detector, heightened sense of veracity, or good old-fashioned healthy scepticism, you and I are much more difficult to persuade than some people are. You don't just want evidence to base your choices on, you need it. They can pile on the emotional levers, the suspicions, the coincidences and the open interpretations, but if you don't find some shred of plausibility to cling to, you just can't bring yourself to take a bogus stand on something you're not sure about. Saying something is true when you can't verify it isn't easy for you. It feels deeply wrong. It's not just that you can see the other side, you can't avoid seeing it. It's always there in your peripheral vision, reminding you about fairness, context, and balance in everything you do. If you ever do choose one side or the other, it'll be when they've made a solid case you can relate to and believe in, and not before. Now, this is the point where I interrupt the flow of the video for a moment to point out that I can't do this without support from my patrons. I've had a rough couple of years personally, and I now rely on this work to survive, so having so many solid patrons backing me has been a lifeline and a constant source of inspiration. If you'd like to help me make more content like this, then there's links to Patreon for monthly pledges or Ko-fi for a one-off gesture of support, and of course I'd love it if you liked and subscribed to the channel if you haven't already. Now, I said just now that this feeling of being caught in between warring factions over the most mundane and fundamental facts of life is one I'm very familiar with. Ever since my earliest memories, I can recall my sense of veracity being set on fire daily, of being forced to make choices I didn't want to make or feel ready to make, of constantly having to resist being manipulated into betraying my own judgment. This video is a little different for me, because normally when I talk about this sense of veracity and how it gets in the way of communication, I'm discussing the way autistic minds like mine work differently to the everyday folks we live with. An extremely heightened sense of veracity is one of the defining characteristics of an autism diagnosis, because we're born with a higher need for evidence, clarity and coherence than almost anyone, and it's been causing us bother for a long time. But I am not suggesting you're autistic. I mean, it's possible, but it's unlikely if this feeling we're talking about is relatively new to you. If you honestly can't remember a time that you didn't feel this way, and it's not the only way you felt like you might be living in the wrong timeline, then it might be worth looking into. But maybe watch the rest of this video before you start your search, and check out the playlist that I've linked above there as your first stop. Please. All autism-focused creators like me get mail and messages thanking us for helping someone realise that they might be autistic. But recently, I've received more and more from folks telling me the opposite. They watched a few of my videos and it confirmed they're not autistic. They came here thinking autism might explain the way they felt, but they went away knowing it isn't the answer they were looking for.
Autism is not the answer I was looking for.
But what do you think most of them made them curious about autism in the first place? You guessed it. It was this feeling we're talking about now. This feeling of alienation, of being stuck between two or more extremes, is one most autistic people are familiar with. But like I said, this isn't a video about autism. It's about you feeling something new to you that autistic people already know about. But it worries me. Autistic folks, like me, are born with this hypersensitivity which helps define us as neurodivergent, so we're used to this feeling. But if regular, non-autistic folks are starting to feel some of what we feel all our lives, then something must be very wrong with the world. The only reason so many autistic people have always felt like this is because our veracity gauges are forever set to the max. We're constantly spotting inconsistencies, contradictions, and holes in every story, but we keep quiet about most of them. That's part of the process we call masking. Your veracity gauge must be set pretty high too, but maybe at a more socially acceptable 9 or 10 than my 11 plus. Unlike me, you probably don't normally have to hide your feelings about innocuous subjects to avoid lengthy explanations and quizzical looks, nor run the risk of an attention-grabbing emotional event should that prove to be too much for you. This frustration you feel at truth being abandoned for feelings, facts being tossed aside for opinions, wasn't there a few years ago, but these days, You can't escape it now. Having a sense of veracity that's turned up so high has made life difficult for me, both professionally and personally. It's surprising how many people would rather start an argument than answer a straightforward question, or who feel threatened by true candour and willingness to share. But a regular strong sense of veracity, the 8s, 9s and 10s, they used to be an asset. Qualities we traditionally value in other people like honesty, candour, loyalty, creativity, generosity and kindness have always gone hand in hand with high veracity. People like that are good to have around and make for reliable, trustworthy friends because they are consistent. In the most simple terms, people that you can trust to do the right thing or the fair thing, even when they might lose out themselves, make for better friends. They'll watch your back when others are looking out for their own. But to someone with an agenda or a spurious point to prove, people who care deeply about facts and evidence are particularly troublesome. We'll be the last ones to fall to either side, if we fall at all. We may not be their enemies yet, but we're certainly not their friends, and so we're not to be trusted or allowed any of the privileges of the in crowd until we commit. The very qualities that were a strength to you in the past are starting to feel like a liability now, so it's no wonder you're tearing your hair out. And no, that's not what happened to mine. Going back to those viewers of mine who turned out not to be autistic, there's no common factor, no uniting characteristics between them other than this feeling. There's no particular age group or nationality represented. There's no gender bias that I've noticed, nor is it linked to education, profession, employment status, disability, political leanings, or who they prefer to get jiggy with. They were all just regular people, like you, who feel out of place in a world which just changed under them. One way or another, they all make the same observation that they just don't enjoy being around people as much as they used to because folks around them seem to value winning arguments more than knowing the truth. Thing is, a couple of them are patrons of mine to this day, and plenty still watch the channel, not because they're still wondering about themselves, but because they found the channels useful. Although they know that they're not autistic or ADHD or whatever started them looking into this in the first place, they recognise that they struggle with some of the same things we do. And if we have the same problems, we can benefit from similar solutions too. The world feels like it's going or gone crazy from your perspective right now, but it's always felt crazy to me and my neurodivergent friends. So we've plenty of techniques for surviving, sometimes thriving in a world gone mad. They might not suit you in calmer times, but perhaps learning a little about how autistic and ADHD people use masking to go unnoticed, or scripting to avoid conflicts might be handy for you right now. Skills like pruning, filtering, input reduction, social prioritising, uplifting, sensory balancing, and others which have allowed autistic people to cope with the craziness we see might get you through the next few years until things start to make sense again. Autistic people have been living with this same feeling you know now for our whole lives, and believe me, it's a lot worse for us now than it's ever been. But most of us are still hanging on through the chaos, so something we're doing must be working. I want to get this video out there, so I'll not talk further today about how neurodivergent people deal with our heightened veracity when it becomes a burden in an increasingly deceptive world. But if you'd like me to go into more detail, let me know in the comments. I've had to put most of my survival tools into action in recent years myself, because outside this channel my life's been eventful, shall we say? So all the skills I've learned over decades of being the odd one out have been deployed in force, keeping me sane and kicking back where needed. If you're not autistic, then I'm really glad that you've joined me for this little chat, and I hope that even if we can't help you get through this, that at least you've learned a little about our world. To be honest, I'd much rather be pointing out the nicer things we all have in common, but them's the breaks, I guess. I'll be talking about veracity in much greater detail when I return to the Triad of Distinction series shortly. But if you'd like to hear more on this topic from a broader perspective, perhaps how some of those autistic survival tools can be useful for non-autistic folks, then drop me a comment. Either way, I'll be back very soon. Until then, I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic. Thank you for watching.